My name is Lonnie Douglas. I am with the Eugene Springfield Solidarity Network. I'm here with Thomas Brown, who is president of the Solidarity Action Network, which is our sister organization, our 501c4. We're here with Cliff Brown, who is running for
Cliff
Eugene.
Gray.
Oh, sorry, Cliff Gray.
Close.
Who is running for Eugene City Council, Ward 1, right, Cliff?
Ward
No.
7.
Is it Ward 7?
Yes.
Dang, I'm like, I have no idea what the heck I'm talking about, do I? So Cliff Gray, Ward 7, outstanding. Cliff, real quick, I just want to let the viewers know that these candidate interviews are not an endorsement of any candidate. Both organizations are nonpartisan and do not endorse candidates at the local, state, or federal level. This is so that the candidates can get an opportunity to engage with more voters. With the COVID crisis, that has been a challenge because they can't go out and knock on doors. We're hoping that this will help educate voters when they start filling out their ballots and are voting for their city council. So, Cliff, why don't we go ahead and give you 3 to 4 minutes to just go ahead and tell us who you are and what you're all about.
Well, okay. Hi, folks. I'm Cliff Gray, and I'm running for City Council for Ward 7, which is, in case you don't know, that's River Road. That's Santa Clara District, the Whitaker, which I love, and Train Song. Oh, actually, I love them all. And even going out west as far as Center above 7th Avenue. So if you're in there, you're on the right channel. Now, I started all this a long time when I came in here 10 years ago. I was pretty shocked at what my friends and Oregonians were used to accepting as just a fact of life. And one of those facts of life was incredibly high rents. I've never seen anything quite like that in a place where the property values were so very cheap. We're talking 10 years ago, okay? But in comparison to where I came from, it's still very cheap. So in relation to property values, the kind of money that these landlords are charging you is pretty outlandish. It goes beyond anything reasonable. And in comparison to San Francisco, I ran a comparison once where I found that the rents were twice what they should be, 2 times. And I could prove that. Now, so I started work. I made a suggestion to Tina Kotek when I ran into her after her last Democratic convention speech, and I suggested, why don't you take on this prohibition you have against rent control? So, because rent control has been prohibited in Oregon since 1985, and I guess she heard me and a lot of other people too, Portland area especially, and she took it on. She took it on with HB 2001, 2003, and 2004. Of course, as the things faded out, we were left with HB 2004. Well, this is 2016, okay. But it did eliminate the prohibition. And if it had passed, we could start drafting Eugene's and Springfield's version of rent control. And one, it would be a full 3rd generation that learns everything from the past of evolving rent control program. But we failed. All right. The second issue, which hit me pretty hard, was this rush for housing. Well, the problem with housing is that, first of all, it's more of a tenants crisis because they can't afford the housing that exists. And the problem that we see the charts, even the city's own charts, it shows that the half the renters are paying, 50% of their income towards rent. And why is this? I don't get it. And the response to the city thus far is to build more high-cost rentals. So that upset me quite a bit. They decided to look into the housing market, see how it works, see how the council becomes the arbiter, the worker for the development and real estate community, and goes out there and starts these programs of building these huge apartment buildings that cost anywhere from $250,000 per unit per apartment, all the way up to $360,000. Now, there's something wrong in that alone. Now, if you look at the development of some of those things, you get the full cost barrier there, you find out that half the cost has to do with the cost of money. Some of it to a degree of almost 40% of the cost of a building. That's before you even lay the first brick. And I'm seeing that it's just money being handed back and forth to investors, to investor groups, to stockholders, to required auditors, audits of the progress at various levels, on and on and on, and it's just too much. So now we're in a crisis of, we are continually raising the rents at an extremely unsustainable rate. Unsustainable means anything above the rise in earnings for any single person. If it's higher than that, then that is unsustainable, and it will lead to a point where you are displaced. The main theme of my campaign is gentrification. Now, it isn't just talking about the poor, it also talks about the middle class and even the upper middle class, because they are faced with paying all this. And when they seek to economize their own finances, they go down. They look down at the lesser costing things that the poor actually need to survive in. So they get bumped out, and they go to another place where the rents go up and they have to leave. And then they go up to someplace else, and they might get evicted. It might be just another rent raise they just can't afford anymore. And then they end up homeless. So it's a constant chain. In the city, now my role in the city government is to educate and make them take responsibility for this process, because they're like firemen who set fires to put them out later by providing services for homeless people, and claiming themselves as heroes. Well, that's not quite the case, is it? What I want to do is take the matches away from them, so they don't start any more fires that rush people from this nomadic migration throughout the city. They do no measure of what happens to the people who live in Eugene. They don't take account of where people are moving, how much they're paying for rent. They have to go to census, the federal census to figure out what that is. And they're so out of date and inaccurate. And there's a huge list of things they do not list. And they need to know just how bad off our own people are, but they don't know and they don't care.
All right, Cliff. So let's go ahead and move on to the questions, okay? So,
Okay.
yep. So, Tom, you want to? I'll start off, or do you want to start off with the first question, Tom?
I think all we're going to talk about is housing, it sounds like. The first question is, it doesn't take a Ouija board or a crystal ball to see that the current recession will exacerbate Eugene's affordable housing crisis and force yet more residents onto the streets. How will you respond to the immediate spike in homelessness and the housing instability? And what measures will you take over the long term to help Eugene's unhoused?
That's an excellent question. Really is right to my point. But one thing I've noticed, I said, well, I need my glasses. I'm sorry. I hate these things. Huh. Anyway, one thing I've noticed is that, yeah, of course, it's just forcing more residents into the streets. Affordable housing just doesn't exist. Affordable is what my some in my race is describing as affordable workforce housing levels, which is 100% of the AMI. Well, that's really, which is like $52,000 or $3,000 a year in order to, and then they make affordable for them. Now, we're going to have a future huge spike in homelessness and housing instability. So what I am going to try to get passed as quickly as I can is a tax on empty homes. Because they start kicking people out and no one can afford those homes any further, well, then they're going to be taxed a good solid amount until they let the people back in. All empty homes. That was my original plan before the COVID came out. And it would simplify, and assist in perhaps reducing rents to avoid the tax. Of course, the tax has to be pretty sufficient to work at any good level. Paris is the king of that tax. They started with 20% of the market value of the house. And even that didn't work for them. So they moved it up to 60%. Now keep that in mind. There are other places where they've employed such a tax, which is Vancouver, British Columbia. I think I got that right. Anyway, and there's also a proposal in the works in Los Angeles to adopt a similar tax measure of empty homes to bring them back out on the market. Because I think you will find, as I did in my own neighborhood, that we have a huge number of abandoned housing. Some are crumbling, some are just kept off the market by investors, and others are just owned by banks or stuck in limbo because the former homeowner who died took a reverse mortgage. So that's a huge debt to overcome for anyone to go in and buy. But if they're forced to put them out on the market, that will help the housing situation considerably.
So Cliff, sort of a follow-up to that. So we're talking about, I mean, obviously, if we can get people homes, that will deal with the unhoused situation. But in the more immediate, with the more immediate crisis, the people that are currently unhoused, there's a huge barrier to getting a home if you're currently unhoused. I mean, it's hard to even get a job. It's hard to even take a shower or wash your clothes, to go to a job interview. So what would you do for those people who are currently unhoused, and what supports could you put in place for them? I think that's more what the question is kind of going to in this regard.
Well, first off, decriminalize the homeless completely. We have to get everything that affects their credit record, because homelessness is not a crime. And there are a great many crimes which might seem at the surface unrelated, but they are. I mean, like blocking a bus stop or something, which is actually just a tool of getting a homeless camper off the sidewalk. Such things as that. You have to include it all in order to clear their record. And then because people do record searches now for home people, they even include whether you were evicted, and even if you win your eviction in court, until recently, that was counted against your record because you fought the landlord, and landlords don't like fights. So you have to first get them off the street. I mean, the TAC report was not a bad idea, and something I discussed answering questions for the Eugene Weekly, which is coming up 2 days, I guess, is that I was complaining that the shelter situation and the services were never enough to cover anything, certainly much less than the so-called TAC report was saying was necessary. The problem is we're just doing token levels, but the reason that we're doing token levels is a form of punishment. In other words, you shouldn't be getting these services because you, the homeless, are responsible for their own condition. Therefore, we're not ever going to build beyond these token levels, even though they'll be wholly overwhelmed by new entering homeless people throughout, every year. So they have to rebuild. They built the same amount they did today. Next year and the year after and the year after, they would never catch up.
Okay, let's move on.
I got one question, real quick. So this punitive tax on empty housing, what would you do with the proceeds?
Proceeds would be, oh, thank you. Good question. The proceeds would be dedicated to refurbishing those housing. Now we're not just talking about housing either. We're also talking about abandoned business sites and buildings that can be converted to housing or like a residence hotel, SROs. The money would be totally dedicated because it's self-effacing. If we succeed in bringing all of the abandoned homes and business sites back into business, then the tax disappears.
Yes, I have a friend who's interested in the city buying homes and renting them to lower income couples and families. But that's another matter. Did you want to take the next question, Lonnie?
Yeah. So last June, the city council voted to implement a payroll tax in Eugene. They also decided not to refer this tax to the voters. What is your stance on payroll taxes in general? And do you agree with their decision not to refer it to the voters?
It was a dumb idea from the very beginning, but there is a history behind it, and that is that the city council has often put tax increases before the voters, but every single one of them were regressive. That means that the very poor paid the exact same amount of tax as the very rich, every single time. So of course they subverted the whole thing to produce this payroll tax, which is also regressive. If you are earning 1 cent above minimum wage, you have to pay the tax. While everyone else, is spread fairly evenly, all the way up. It was dumb, and they pretended it was going to help with homeless services. There's the majority of it, but instead the majority was used for more police, more criminalizations, more, you know, evictions of camps, sweeps, all of that.
Okay. Todd, you want the next question?
Yeah, it's back to housing. Actually, why don't we skip to the number 4, and then we can come back with some follow-ups. The need to incentivize affordable housing development can place landowners and developers, affordable housing activists, and labor groups at odds. How will you manage the conflict between the 1% and the rest of the community?
Well, that's the interesting observation I have to tell you about. Eugene is owned by developers and real estate. Simple as that. They comply with everything. They just run. They're just nothing but stamp, you know, stampers of the papers to go through. And a lot of us in East Springfield side believe the same thing. Anyway, let me see here. The cost cut arounds, you know, are very subversive in the sense that, you know, we're reducing costs for ADUs. Well, that's no harm in that, but the problem with that is that the savings we're trying to give the ADUs are going to be given to every other project as well. It's going to go right up the ladder. Mm-hmm. And at some point, some of those system development charges are legitimate. In other words, to maintain and build streets to the new housing, wherever it is, and sidewalks and that kind of thing. And it could deplete our ability to keep that promise of maintenance way in the future. But also, as far as protection of jobs, I mean, every worker I've known who's worked on a building project, the big ones, hey, take the Gordon Lofts downtown right now. Those workers, when that is done, they are out of work. Mm-hmm. I mean, saving what jobs? It's a temp job to begin with. I mean, it'll last 9 months, but after that, they're sitting at home for the next 4, 5, 6, you know, until the next big thing comes in. And you should note also that MUFTI has a very interesting provision in it. It says that 50% of the workers on the project must be from Eugene. Now, Lucy Venice told me once, says, well, that means unions. It means be union. It doesn't require unions at all, not at all. It can be any lazy bloke they pick up off the street to shovel cement. Let's see.
Now we can move on unless you've got quick.
It's just that, you know, the housing is built for housing's own sake. It's not meant to. And the question which I constantly have to put out there is, who is going to live in this thing? Who's going to live in the Gordon Lofts, etc. Over again? Who's going to live in the River Road development in my ward?
Yeah, the Lombard.
Cool.
And the Lombard apartments. Oh, that's cute. Yeah. It's coming again in the paper about protests on that. We have the Greenway Guardians, you know, working through our group and ENI, is Eugene Neighborhoods Incorporated, to handle their funds. But there were 500 signatures on that. And did that do any good or change the position of the city or to help them? Nothing. Doesn't mean a thing to the city. No one would think a petition of that size would have a huge impact, but not so. They were on their own and their own burden to take the issue to court. There was a miraculous conversion of the land, which is designated flood site, floodwater area, which required, you know, filling in at least 2 feet to raise the land, at least 2-3 feet before they could build anything on it. And suddenly that designation disappeared somewhere, somehow. So they're going to start building these Lombard apartments. And when they're done, they're going to start sinking. And then, it seems like there's a little bit of corruption everywhere you look.
Mm-hmm.
So just a follow up to that question, though, when they're talking about it, I think they're talking about in the question we're talking about the wealthy developers, which you said, the people with the money who seem to have an awful lot of say with our city council versus the common working class people that, frankly, keep the city, functioning and running. As a city councilor, how are you going to, how are you going to allow the people to have the access and to be able to engage with you? Because, it seems the people, the rich people, and I'm not talking about the guy who's a middle class dude here in, my neighborhood who has a $200,000, $300,000 home. I'm talking about, the rich fat cats that, they could buy my home, 50 times over for fun. How do we ensure that you're listening and getting info from us, the common working folk, and not just listening to them? I think.
Well, first, I'm wide open. I'm connected to you guys first. On every graph of my literature is my phone number, my email address, my Facebook page, and of course the election professional Facebook page, whatever good that was. Anyway, so and I already had a phone call today about my literature coming back. So I'm going to be connected. That is the problem. Is there a complete total disconnect between the incumbent and my ward and the rest of the city. Now, what I'm saying is that there's perhaps a bit of corruption involved there, but I think, corruption that we really like to talk about is the ones with the wink and the money under the table. Well, it's much more complex than that. You also have corruption of ideals. In other words, there's several really powerful groups out there which influence which direction city officials take. And they listen to them and not to the people. They don't make their own assessments, but they do listen to strong towns, better housing together, which is Portland Group. I forgot already. Sightline Institute, which is promoting heavily the missing middle concept, all of it, which is routinely accepted now as the new in thing to do. Redevelopment, books that Happy City, which is Lucy Venice's favorite book at the moment. There's ADU books on how to build, to support that. But strong towns in particular, you want to discover what they're about? Read the book that they profess is their model, and you'll see right away. They sound great on the surface, but it's talking about redevelopment, and gentrification as a positive thing.
Okay. Well, we're about at time here. What I wanted to do was make sure that we give you an opportunity. Do you have a website or a Facebook page or anything?
Well, I have Cliff Gray for Eugene City Council Facebook page. Now, I haven't done a web page, and the reason I don't is partly because there's no interchange of information on a web page. You broadcast propaganda out, and there's no way for people to respond back in. And with the Facebook page, there's my own Facebook site, Cliff Gray. Very simple, Gray on Facebook. If you want to know what I'm about, look at what I post. Look at my posting history. And then there's a phone number right there. That's my home phone. And I'm very happy to have anyone call me at any time.
Okay.
And the email address is pretty busy, so that would be my last choice if you wanted to do that, because I have hundreds of things I've signed up for on my personal email address I'm using. So come talk to me, ask me questions directly. I will answer them for you.
So they could text you on your phone? The text,
Pardon me?
you receive texts on your, with that phone number?
The home phone is just a regular hardline phone, basically.
That's the number that's on your Facebook page?
I do have a cell phone now for a recent acquisition, actually, and I'm thinking about giving that out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Is supporting conversation
on here. You might get a, you might want to sleep sometimes, but definitely your Facebook page. So we'll go with we'll go with that. People can engage with your Facebook page. Thank you for coming on, Cliff. We appreciate it. Hopefully, this will help voters to know a little bit more about you and help them make a more informed decision when they're voting. So
Yes.
that's really our goal.
All right.
Yes. Good luck, Cliff, and thank you.
Yep.
Thank you much.
All right.